with no further words, I'm going to introduce Dr. Contreras. Dr. Contreras has stated that her family encouraged education as a means of gaining the tools necessary to live a life of extraordinary service to others. And we have experienced that extraordinary service during her tenure in Guilford County. Dr. Contreras left her position as superintendent of the Syracuse schools in New York State to become superintendent of Guilford County Schools in August of 2016. And during her tenure here, she has endured many storms, physical, financial, storms within the school board, and yet she has remained calm at the helm. We first heard from her when she spoke to the League in 2017 at one of our Lunch with the League programs, which was put on by our Public Education Roundtable. And we were impressed. And then she continued to impress us when tornadoes struck in Southeast Greensboro in 2019. Dr. Contreras was in the streets talking to students, parents, teachers. As a result, most students only missed 3 or 4 days of school. And then she impressed us again the early months of 2020 when she encouraged a maximum number of eligible Guilford County high school students to be registered so that they could vote in the primary. And you may recall that that year we honored Dr. Contreras with a recognition of achievement award in the League. And then in the last year and a half, she has impressed us again with the way that she has led Guilford County schools through the pandemic. Opinions as to how the school system should handle the pandemic were polarized, but she has calmly led us through that maze of closing schools, continuing to provide school lunches for the most vulnerable, opening a virtual academy for those who wanted it, and then slowly and safely reopening schools. And she has done it all with constant critique and inadequate funding. We as a community owe her a debt of gratitude. As a grandparent who has grandchildren in the public schools, I want to say a personal thank you to Dr. Contreras. And as co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad, I'd like to offer our corporate thank you. So thank you. And now, Dr. Contreras.
Thank you so much. What a gracious welcome. I want you to know I am deeply humbled to lead. It's an honor for me to lead the school system, even in the most difficult of times. There are several states who have reported after the COVID pandemic, they've lost a third of the superintendents. 5 of the 7 largest school districts in America have no one at the helm, have left. And the New York Times last Sunday did a feature story about superintendents trying to lead in the midst of the pandemic in a most polarized country. And it's been difficult because being polarized has become the new normal instead of people trying to come together to solve problems. And the superintendents who neither caused this pandemic, haven't caused the inequities like the lack of technology or child hunger, all the issues are the ones who are left to deal with that. And it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. But my passion is so great for transforming life outcomes, not improving test scores, but transforming life outcomes, that I'm willing to take anything for these children. So thank you for allowing me to lead. I am going to share my screen. Okay, there we are. I hope you all can see that. Today I'm going to talk a little bit, just address the issue of equity and social justice during a pandemic. So Finding the leaders of the future is a question of recognizing those people who give leadership in a crisis. So it's pretty easy to lead in good times, but it's a lot more difficult to do that under the situation of a pandemic. So I want to just share quickly, and there are a lot of slides, and you can have this PowerPoint, but I want to make sure that you actually you have it, but I just will go through some of the slides. So our pandemic response and planning goals from the beginning, back in March 2020, was to keep students and staff healthy and safe, but to do so by using science and data. And I can tell you on both sides of the issue, people were not listening to the science and data, and they were trying to make this a political issue or partisan issue, our response to the pandemic. But I am so proud to say we stuck to that data no matter what. We wanted to keep learning going, knowing that the students who needed to be in school the most were the most likely not to receive an education during the pandemic. We
Excuse
wanted to
me.
mitigate.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
We're not seeing your shared screen.
You're not seeing that at all?
No, we're not.
Okay, hold on. I'm so glad my assistant is here too. What do you see right now?
We
Anything?
see you,
You just see me?
you in your background, yes.
Okay. Tamara, they can't see the screen. She's on her way, and I'll just keep talking as she fixes this, if that's okay. So we wanted to, hold on a second. So I'm going to share it again. Do you see it? Do you see it at all?
No, we're still just seeing your
Okay.
face.
Yes, now we do.
Okay, now it's up.
Ah, okay. There we are. So I just have to move this forward a couple slides. Okay, there we are. So we wanted to mitigate against the learning loss, particularly for the most vulnerable. We had to make sure the public health crisis didn't become a hunger crisis, a child hunger crisis, which is why we fought really hard to make sure that under the threat of the previous administration to cut the flexibilities for the school lunch program, school breakfast and lunch program, many of these families would not have eaten at all. And I can tell you, I worked some of the food lines, and everybody was in there. You saw people from every walk of life, Black, white, Latino, it didn't matter. People were struggling, and they were coming through those food lines. So we were glad the school districts in America prevailed in order to provide food for children. As I said, we wanted to provide accurate science-based information and data as it came. But the dilemma we ran into is because this is called the novel COVID, coronavirus, the data kept changing. And the community would look at us as though we were making these things up. They were so frustrated, but we literally kept getting different information as CDC learned more about this, as the Department of Health and Human Services learned about it. So trying to lead through this without having all of the facts made it much more complicated. But we did apply the district's equity framework when making all decisions, and we've carried that forward throughout the planning process. And it's 5 basic questions. Are all racial, ethnic, and other stakeholder groups affected by this policy practice at the table? How will the practice affect each group that we serve? How will the proposed policy or practice or decision be perceived by each group? Does the policy or practice or decision worsen or ignore existing disparities? And we were very careful about that one. And based on the responses to the questions above, What revisions are needed to the policy, practice, or decision under discussion? So this is really important for us to see. We knew the first issue was feeding children when school closed. That was our first thought, not educating them, but making sure they were eating. And you see, there was a prediction that the number of food insecure families would decrease. That was the prediction back in about April 2020. But as you can see to the far right, it actually increased. You also see the broadband issue by poverty level. So if there was greater than 20% poverty in an area, you can see what the average broadband adoption rate is compared to when you get below 10% poverty. You see most of those families did have access. And I can show you here that the percentage of households without broadband was pretty extraordinary. When this is from a national group called the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, you can see Greensboro and High Point right pretty high in the nation for individuals without broadband. And so they didn't have access to school. They literally did not have access to school. So we had one main goal, that was to serve the largest number of students in person for the greatest amount of time. Now, this posed a dilemma for us because the students who needed to be in school the most were Black and Brown children. However, Black and Brown people were most skeptical and fearful about the pandemic. And it took some work to actually convince them to come back to school and to follow the data and science, which was indicating that children were much less likely to have it, and that schools were actually safer than being out in communities and in everyone's home, because parents, there's also a childcare crisis. So parents had children everywhere trying to work and make sure that students weren't left alone. But that actually turned out to contribute to more spread than students being in school. We only have 3 cases on record of clusters outside of athletics in the district during the entire time of the pandemic. And a cluster is 5 cases that are epidemiologically linked. So if you look at our reopening plan overview, we decided we had to provide parents with options. Virtual academies, we had to start 2 entirely new schools in a month. We had to provide remote through the children's school or in-person, even though we didn't have enough teachers, we still somehow made it work, but that was a tremendous burden on teachers who are now teaching 2 groups of students. And we had to use robots to help the teachers teach the students sitting in front of them and the students at home. That's called swivel technology, but they're literally robots that were helping the teachers, and they would follow the teachers so that wherever the teacher was in the room, the parent or student at home could see them. We decided to phase in the grades slowly and adjust as needed. And we returned first pre-K and K. I don't know how many of you are educators, retired educators, but as you know, there's no way to teach pre-K and K remotely. You just can't do that. So we got them back first. And then and along with them, we brought the most vulnerable students back on site. Some of our homeless students, those living in shelters, and certainly some of our self-contained students. Those are special needs children who are the most vulnerable in our public separate buildings and in separate classrooms. We then brought back the middle school students. We provided on-site assessments for them and virtual orientations. And then we phased in the high school students last. But as I said, it was important to make sure everyone was at the table. So we formed a reopening task force that had 164 members. It was a huge task force with administrators, teachers, parents, experts, community partners, and they divided themselves into 3 groups: the HR, Employee Health and Wellness Committee, the Operations and School Readiness Committee, and the Academics and Student Services Committee, to figure out how we serve students who were still home and how we begin to bring students back to school. So more than 20,000 students were learning in person prior to the winter break. Now, this is all interesting because the amount of hate mail I got, emails and threats I got about kids not being in school, we were the only one of the large 5 districts that had elementary students back in school 5 days a week, the only ones of the large 5 districts in the state. We then began phasing back the 6th and 9th graders 2 days a week in February, and then the 7th, 10th, and 12th graders March 1st. By April, however, we have everyone back in school. And again, of the large districts, we are the only ones that have all students who choose to be back in school 5 days a week. We currently have approximately 50,000 students learning in person. That means about 20,000 remain at home and about 3,000 never returned. We still have a lot of work to do. Most of the children in that 3,000 group are kindergartners who never enrolled in school. And that has been a national phenomenon that we don't know where the kindergartners are. And we expect a full return in the fall, and we're gearing up for that right now. We've also begun vaccination partnerships with public health. Our goal was to vaccinate 10,000 employees in 2 weeks, and about 60 to 70% of those employees actually came in and were vaccinated. We did ask them to share if they've been vaccinated or not. And so we're not completely clear, but we know it's up to 70%. And we now have vaccination clinics at our schools for high school students. Well, first they went to the mass vaccination site, and we set up a mobile clinic with Cone Health at Eastern High. And we're now partnering with Cone Health, the Guilford County Public Health, and North Carolina A&T State University Student Health Office to offer more mobile clinics at the schools, because we know the schools are the center of the community. They're more likely to get the students give students vaccinations there, because parents don't have to take off work, go to the doctor's office or to a site. All they have to do is sign a permission slip, and the 12 and 18-year-olds will have access. So here are some of the milestones, just showing how much we push for equity and to make sure every student received a great education. We served close to 7 million meals at the satellite location and as people drove through. And even though we had flexibilities, the meals are supposed to be for children, but we never turned away a single adult. We had elderly coming through, the grandmothers, everyone coming through those lines to feed kids. We provided 79,000 devices, and it took months to get those devices, because when we requested assistance, we didn't get the assistance that we needed to purchase devices. So by the time, and I mean financial assistance, by the time we cobbled together the funding to do this, there was a shortage throughout the world for getting these devices. So it still took months. We had the funding, but we couldn't get them here. And we were still handing out devices in December. We collected 16,000 devices and redistributed to sort of handle this crisis. We purchased 1,800 Wi-Fi hotspots and distributing them. One parent called from rural Southeast Guilford to share that when she called Spectrum, Spectrum said, yes, we can make sure you have broadband connectivity for the low price of $23,000. She had 3 children in the home. She worked as in healthcare, but it was one of those 12-hour shifts and was just in a panic. So we opened learning hubs so that they can drop kids off at school who had no broadband. so the parents could work and the students receive an education. You see the swivel devices I talked about. Those are the robots to help teachers teach. We had 67 school parking lot Wi-Fi access points added, and North Carolina A&T loaned us theirs from their dormitories, took them down so that we can put them up in the parking lots. But let's all be honest about this. Our kids would not have to sit in a parking lot somewhere trying to do their schoolwork. So that was very problematic. We deployed 288 smart buses. We just turned them into Wi-Fi machines and put them in neighborhoods where there wasn't any Wi-Fi, and the buses would just sit there. We were also able to make sure the bus drivers weren't laid off by doing this, and we used the CARES Act funding. We had 270 donated devices. One day I tweeted out, "Please help, I need devices," and people just started dropping them off. With respect to special populations, our K-8 counselors made about 23,000 contacts. We set up a emergency call line, crisis line. So if kids needed food, if they were depressed, if someone was in crisis, they could call 24 hours a day, and our counselors manned those phones. The high school counselors made 17,000 contacts. Social workers did 184 assessments for our EC students. You can see the classroom guidance lessons, just the extraordinary work. The calls for youth crisis hotlines, we spent 2,200 hours in the field just working with parents who didn't speak English. And we had support for our students in transition, also known as homeless students. We bought more than 361,000 units of cleaning and personal protective equipment. You can see the cleaning equipment to the right, just massive amounts of work just trying to acquire these things. You remember for a while, we had a shortage of even getting any cleaning supplies, but we were able to acquire them. And you can see all the work we did to communicate as best we could in a constantly changing environment. You see the 90,000 views of our COVID dashboard, the amount of views on YouTube. We did YouTube videos. We were on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And we worked with all of the partners you see to the right and had 750 volunteers helping us to make sure that we could eventually get all the students back in. So they helped us as we did the slow rollout of reentry. But we had a lot of work to do with making sure that students were, or we were mitigating that learning loss. So you can see here, this is a diagnostic assessment that students took. You could see how low, or the low percentage of students that were on grade level in reading for K2, but you can see how that increased just when they came back. The students that were back for 5 weeks, because we gave this assessment 5 weeks after students returned. All other students, we had them come to the building to take the assessment, even if they were virtual. You can see the growth or the difference in the achievement between those who were in school for just those 5 weeks and those who sat home. And look at the differences between when you look at reading performance by race. And this is our EC students and our English language learners who had the lowest performance of any group. And you see similar performance by math, although it is worse. Only 38% of K through second graders were actually performing at grade level. But look at the difference when you added that 5 weeks, those that had 5 weeks of instruction, it was quite extraordinary to see. And that's the performance by race. So lots of gaps to address. And you see it too at the high schools. the students took their state test, you could see the 18.7 percentage point drop in Math 1, the 4.3 percentage drop in English. And in course grades, what was very disconcerting to us is that the number of students who were failing, if you compare Q1 this year to Q1 last year, was significantly higher. And you see this by race. So the blue box shows the 2019-20 school year, the gold box, the 2021 school year, and those are failure rates. That's Q1, EC students and English language learners. And this is Q2. We saw that Q2 was worse than Q1, which is very problematic for us, because now we have to figure out, what do we do to change the circumstances here? So fortunately, the district is receiving $287 million in ESSER funds. Now, I know that seems like an extraordinary amount of money, but we actually had planned for about 400 million. And if schools in North Carolina were funded at the national average, per pupil national average spending level, we would receive about 200 million a year more than we currently receive if we were just at the average, but we're so far below the average. So this money is helpful, but it's money we need every single year to make sure that students are on track. So let's share what we're doing with that to ensure equity in our schools. We have 8 priorities to accelerate learning, close the digital divide, create strong post-secondary pathways. We're investing in basic instructional materials and resources so that students have textbooks, even if they're digital textbooks. We're investing in our staff capacity. We hire 350 to 500 teachers a year. That is worsening. That condition is worsening as what's called the supplement pay between districts becomes greater. So we rank number 12 in supplement pay, even though we're the 3rd largest district. And that's because there has been almost no investment, or an average of $37 a year investment in our teachers by the county. Whereas the counties of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, Wake, Durham are investing in their teachers at a rate of about $1,000 or more a year, while we invest 37. So that's how the difference, or the gap, has become so wide. We also are investing in recruiting, retaining, and rewarding our most effective staff, making sure we bring them into the district, making sure those here don't leave. Of course, we're trying to reopen schools and keep them open. And we're investing in oversight and accountability to make sure that nearly $300 million is spent well. So some of the things we're doing that you may find exciting, I certainly find them exciting. We are buying school buses, the yellow school buses, and renovating the inside to create mobile buses for community supports, including tutors on wheels that have Wi-Fi capacity. They can go into neighborhoods where students typically struggle or don't have Wi-Fi, and students can get on the bus and do their homework at desk and get support. We'll also have laundry buses. One of the reasons students are out of school is they don't have clean clothes. So we're going to do something like the Loads of Hope from Tide and renovate 2 buses to be mobile laundries. We're also going to do mobile arts buses. My son takes guitar lessons that cost me $125 a week. But for many students, they can't afford that. So we continue to provide access for them by sending our music teachers out into the community. We're also going to have mobile health buses to address the issues of chronic asthma and childhood diabetes, which are 2 reasons students are out of school, and hopefully to also help provide vaccinations. We also will continue our high dosage tutoring core, which we started since the pandemic began. And we partner with our local universities the graduate assistants at North Carolina A&T State University. We have about 100 that are paid by the district, their full graduate assistantship. And they work not at North Carolina A&T, but the 20 hours a week with the district, with the absolute lowest performers. And these are individuals with at least undergraduate degrees in math and the sciences, and they are working on another degree, a graduate degree. We also are paying our own high school students who are in AP and IB classes to tutor their peers. And we're working with High Point University, who is not taking any money for this because it's part of their requirement to graduate. So their students do this as part of service learning. And we're working with North Carolina A&T and UNCG, paying undergraduates to tutor students who are behind. We're doing everything in our power to catch them up. We're also focused on tuition-free college courses. So we are expanding the number of students who are going to GTCC while still in high school and getting college credit so that when they go off to college, they're not in debt all their lives. We're working with UNCG, the City of Greensboro, and North Carolina A&T to purchase our own cell towers and put them throughout the community so that not just the students, but the families have access to Wi-Fi. As you know, there's very little you can do today without access to Wi-Fi. You can't complete job applications, college applications. For a while, we had to purchase our groceries by going through these websites, going to the grocery store websites. There's now telehealth. So it's important to us that this community is connected. We're also buying a mass notification system for the buildings so that in emergencies, the emergency services can communicate with one another. We have more than $10 million in this plan, I think about 20 million, to ensure that students and teacher devices are replaced as we have new students or we have problems with the devices, the normal wear and tear. One area where we're really weak in the district is with creating strong post-secondary pathways, and that's making sure students leave here and go on to college, that they actually show up. In the nation, we saw a 13% decrease in the number of 12th graders who were accepted to college, but actually showed up this year. So we're getting college bridge counselors that will make sure that students, particularly students from low-income homes, complete at least one college application, either at the community college or four-year school. And then they fill out the FAFSA, which is very cumbersome, and then actually enroll on day one. We also are going to create a post-secondary tracking system to see, did they go to college? Did they complete? Did they have a credential to go in the workforce? Who hired them? Are they making similar salaries to other regions? So we're going to track that data. We're also using our spaces now to make sure we have dual generation programs. So you may have heard about our signature academies in transportation, logistics, computer sciences, in the health careers. We will open that up to the children, to the parents of our children, particularly those who do not have credentials, who want to work but can't get a job because they don't have the skill set. I hope that you see as we talk through this, a lot of this is really long-term thinking about economic prosperity, closing the racial wealth gap, making sure we support kids, not just in school, but their families, and we support them so they're not in debt and actually have a chance for economic prosperity. So that is underscoring everything we do here. We're also updating and expanding the library media collections by $2 million a year. We're expanding the digital learning resources to support classroom instruction. And we're establishing a new newcomer school at Andrews High and High Point. Newcomer schools support our English language learners who are new to the country. We're adding interpreters. And, you know, I feel the school district doesn't get enough credit for the work they do on behalf of the entire county. like the high percentages return for the census return was in no small part because the district's interpreters went out and knocked on thousands of doors and convinced parents to complete that census. And so I just really honor the work they do for very little pay, because they can, work for the UN or somewhere and make a lot more money, but they are making huge contributions to this community that you may never hear about. We're also starting community schools. Those are schools with wraparound services, mental health supports, helping families get degrees, both the high school diplomas, the college degrees, just really providing a lot of supports. And we're starting that in High Point. And we are going to relaunch our attendance campaign. For retention bonuses, keeping staff when they're not being paid very much by the county, we are trying to incentivize the 108 teachers that have multiple years of highly effective data to stay with a $20,000 signing bonus to stay on, to re-sign their contracts, while also providing the same amount to teachers in other districts to come to Guilford County in their hard to staff subject areas like EC teachers, teachers of English as a second language, math, science. We have principal recruitment incentives. This is not the time to really put a new person in a principalship, but we have other districts paying up to $172,000 to principals a year because they're worth their weight in gold. And we are more than $60,000, $70,000 behind those districts. So we have to do something to get seasoned veteran principals in the district. And we're also going to provide incentives for certified staff in the 25 lowest performing schools. Also included in this budget is a bonus for all classified staff, all support staff, that equates to $15 an hour. Now, this isn't a raise because we can't give raises out of temporary funds, but this bonus structure for the next 2 years will allow us to give them checks that equate to $15 an hour. I ask that you continue to appeal to the Board of County Commissioners to fund this, or else in 2 years, these folks will be back to making $11, $12 an hour. And no one who works full-time should have to be on food stamps or collect food stamps in this country. We are creating outdoor classrooms at every school. And if you'd like to see one, I'd be glad to escort you all to Faust Elementary to see the first one we built. We have about $26 million in this budget to continue to address maintaining ventilation and improving air quality, something that should have been done all along. And I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for supporting the bond referendum. It wasn't nearly what we had hoped for, but it's a good start. And I know that's a result of the work you've done here. So where do we go from here? We know we'll be dealing with the pandemic next year as well. So please support GCS as we address facilities issues. My understanding is 1.6 million that we originally needed will be put forth to the voters as a bond referendum in May 2022. Please help us as we create a new vision for what public schools and public education can be. We're really excited about many of these initiatives. One I forgot to mention is we are renovating a school in East Greensboro to be only a pre-K site, just a wonderful school, Guilford County's first pre-K school to give youngsters a great start. We're going to increase the social emotional support for students. I ask that you ask elected officials to address the broadband access gap in this area. We should not be spending millions of dollars of our ESSER funds to try to address what is a federal and state crisis. And even a local crisis. I think we could be doing more to make sure that everyone has access to Wi-Fi, just like we did with making sure in the early 1900s that everyone had access to electricity. We're extending learning time and days for the 25 lowest performing schools in the district, and we're paying teachers extra to do that, just giving students more of a chance to be successful, and certainly adding more professional learning days for so many new teachers who are coming in and struggling, have not gone through a traditional school of education, but really have a heart to teach, and that's half the battle. We're increasing our investment in accelerating learning, and we ask that you push on our legislators to just continue to invest in this, not just during a pandemic, but at all times. We need to be addressing the neediest children and recognizing that the impact of the pandemic on this generation of school-age children is profound and will likely last a lifetime. We have some lessons that we've learned over time. So we need to remind the legislators about that all the time, that this is not something that you can fix with an infusion of funds for 1 or 2 years. Please support and advocate for GCS and join in fighting for equity. There's a major push in this country, in states all throughout the nation, trying to erase history and tell us not to teach equity or push for equity in our schools. And I think that's just so unfortunate. Please ask the state legislators to stop telling us what to teach, how to teach. You can't legislate that. Those are local decisions. But they've really gotten involved in this. And one piece of legislation even said summer school must be fun. Okay, so how do we abide by that law? You know, what's fun? Who measures that? What would be breaking the law? So I just think that they're getting a little too involved in the Board of Education's work. Please support, donate to, and volunteer with our community partners who focus on equity, hunger, housing instability, and poverty. And I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you do that. Help us correct misinformation. That's been really difficult during the pandemic. There's so much misinformation and fear. We want to make sure that our families have great information about what's happening here in GCS. And if you have a question, need information, please use Let's Talk, and we get back to you within 48 hours. Again, I'm so grateful to all of you for all of your work. And please, any questions that you have, I'd love to answer them for you.
Thank you, Dr. Contreras. That is overwhelmingly amazing. Are there questions for Dr. Contreras? Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. And she said she would be glad to answer questions. Okay, Barbara.
I would like to know if Dr. Contreras can tell us if the election in 2020, a new school board members and a new county commission is favorable to maybe increasing that $37 that she was saying that, you know, has been contributed. In other words, you think this might be a good time that we might be able to get that?
I'm really hopeful, Barbara, and they ran on that issue. So,
Okay.
you know, what I don't want to happen is, what I'm hearing is this is going to be rate neutral. We will never increase taxes, because all you're going to do is shuffle the money. And I don't want them to take money from parks or healthcare to give to me.
Right.
If you ran on that issue, you have to have the courage to take that issue on. And in fact, the tax rate used to be higher here. They reduced it by ½ cent every year. So you don't have to increase it. You can just get it back to where it was, which would provide us with about $25 million more a year. Not the national average, but 25 million would help with our employees and them having to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet.
Are there other questions? Well, thank you so much, Dr. Contreras. Oh, Tricia has a question. Go ahead, Tricia.
Well, it's more a comment than a question. I just, as I look at all that you have been doing this past year, it does seem amazing what you've been able to do and the kinds of careful, thoughtful approach to how to deal with the crisis. And I was somebody who was involved in the pressure on the county commissioners and have been interested, but I didn't know anything about what actually you were doing, and would encourage you to make sure that you have some staff who's really paying attention to PR for you, not for you personally, but for what this team is doing, because you really are doing an amazing job. And I think a lot of us need to hear the specifics of what you're doing. So just encourage you to keep us informed about what you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. If you have ideas how we can do that better for community members who don't have children in the district, that would be very helpful. Last year, we spent more than $700,000 on PR, just really trying to communicate. But every time I present, people are so amazed at just the vast amount of work and innovation happening. And we know we're not reaching as well those who don't have children in the district. So would love your thoughts at some point. You can call me, email me. We can have a meeting with a smaller group of you at some point. That would help me so very much, because we want the community to be proud of the schools and to know we're not just sitting here twiddling our thumbs, that everyone's working really hard to provide children with the schools they need and the community with schools they would be proud of. So thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
Carolyn.
Dr. Contreras, this is Carolyn Bunker, and I'm on the Board of Elections, and also I worked with the Guilford County Schools when we registered the high school students in 2020, and just wanted to let you know that we would love to come back with You Can Vote and register the students this coming year.
Thank you. I certainly intend to, and I thank those of you who wrote letters to the editor. That really helped. We had business leaders who were threatened not to support me if I allowed children to vote. I was personally told that they would not support. There were people who said they will not support the bond if I let children vote. And I said, well, so be it, because there's nothing more precious in this democracy than voting, and you will never intimidate me. So I think it's really important that when you see these things growing, you have to pick up the phone and call the board members who sit there, whose job is to make sure students are prepared for democracy, and will condemn students voting when it's in the state law that we must register them. Most people didn't know it's in the state law, but they were very angry that I actually allowed the social studies teachers to put them on a bus and to exercise their right to vote, something we should all be proud of. But it was a very difficult time for me personally, but I certainly saw the letters that some of you wrote from the League of Women Voters and to the editor, and that was very helpful.
But we were so proud and thankful that you allowed us to do this. And we were, I'm sure you know this, but we have, in that age group, we had more voters in Guilford County than any other county in North Carolina. So we're very happy with that.
The greatest percentage, and that was true for the general election too. And there has not been a single story about that anywhere. So I think that it would be helpful if we could get someone, Ed, NC, we need someone to pick that up, that it matters. Registering students matter, and that you can get 18-year-olds, that 18 to 25 age group to vote if you remove barriers for them. So I'm still hopeful that we can get some press around that.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Well, then again, thank you very, very much, not only for your time for us, but for all you are doing for the children, their parents, our whole community. We consider ourselves very, very fortunate to have you leading Guilford County Schools. So
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your contribution on behalf of my brother. Tomorrow, I travel to New York where his name will be placed on the wall for police officers law enforcement who die in the line of duty. So it will be a tough day. But I thank you for this, and I'll let my family know. It means so much to me. I appreciate all of you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And